If you knew what was in the night, you'd never venture out into it. Humanity believes it is the master of this planet. But there are things, ancient things that inhabit this world and for now at least, coexist with us somewhat peacefully. But if we venture too far, off the beaten path, we come in contact with entities and occurrences that exist in the dark.
The Accident, Roxborough, North Carolina. Thank you for providing an outlet to get this off my chest. I don't want my name revealed because my husband had a hard time dealing with this and has filed it away. I don't want to reopen an old wound that was uncomfortable for him and me, but I was and still am intrigued by it. I'm not looking for answers. I just need to share. Something happened to us, and it proved to me that this universe is a lot bigger and a lot more complicated than I ever imagined before this incident. My in-laws live in Maryland. Every Thanksgiving, we'll drive up to Maryland to spend the holiday with them. It's about a 6-hour drive, so we always leave around 10 p.m., and traffic willing, we'll arrive a bit after 4 a.m., enough to get a few hours of sleep before getting up and starting the Thanksgiving Day festivities with family. Well, Thanksgiving 2014, we were in Northern Virginia on I-95. We were making good time and had just over an hour to go when all of a sudden, we were hit from behind. It was terrifying because here we are on one of the busiest highways in America, even at that time of morning on a holiday. And the way the car hit us, it nudged the rear quarter panel on the driver's side. This sent us into a spin. But thank God, my husband was driving. He kept his hand on the wheel and didn't panic. We had to have spun around 4 times before crashing into the Jersey wall beyond the left shoulder of the road, the slow lane shoulder. The person that hit us had already pulled over up ahead on the shoulder by the time we stopped. Thank God we weren't killed. It's nothing like seeing headlights coming toward you at 70 miles an hour or faster. My husband was hot. He made sure I was okay. Then he did the unbelievable. Filled with adrenaline, he set off in the direction of the car that hit us, shouting and cursing all the way. I wasn't comfortable with this because we didn't know who these people were. But they apologized profusely. Their driver had briefly fallen asleep behind the wheel. Our car was totaled, but we were blessed because it was a rental. Virginia state troopers eventually arrived and called for a tow truck. My husband and I piled into the cab as the tow truck driver hooked up the damaged rental, and off we went. He took us to the airport where we were able to turn in the car to Enterprise and get another one. We hopped back on 95 and jumped onto the Baltimore Beltway eventually in order to hit Route 70 and continue to my husband's parents' home. Well, at this point, all of the adrenaline started to wear off, and we both realized that we did have a few aches and pains and should probably head to a hospital just to make sure everything was okay. My husband said that he remembered a hospital not too far from his parents' home, so we headed there. My in-laws live in a relatively wooded area adjacent to a state park, so I wasn't totally shocked when we ended up on a winding road with deep woods on either side. We turned down a few more side roads, and sure enough, we came to a driveway that had a lighted sign that read hospital in block letters. There was an older model ambulance sitting at the entrance to the emergency room, so we knew we were in the right place. Parking was plentiful, which was to be expected given that it was 0 o'clock in the morning on Thanksgiving. Ironically, one of the few cars in the driveway was one of my favorites, and a dream car desire I'd never been lucky enough to acquire. A 1980s era BMW 850. As we walked across the parking lot, I still remember how quiet it was. I always found it eerily relaxing being out early in the morning. We walked into emergency, and thankfully no other people were in the waiting room. Emergency rooms are notorious for long waits. But this wasn't the case here. Another benefit of the holiday. Almost immediately, a young lady asked us to come over to her station. She bid us a happy Thanksgiving and asked how she could help. We explained we'd been in an accident and were just coming to get checked out. This young lady was very kind and genuinely concerned, I could tell. Interestingly, we noticed that there was an 8.5 by 11 sign on her station that read, "You must have proof of health insurance to be seen." I thought that was a little forward for an emergency room, but we did have insurance, so it wasn't something I paid any attention to, really. After the young woman took our information, she asked us to follow her. She led us from the waiting room to the examination area. There was literally no wait. The examination area was a bit old-fashioned. Instead of individual rooms, there was a collection of larger rooms with 4 examination stations each. Everything seemed just a bit outdated, but immaculate and clean. I asked my husband about this, and he said he thought these rural hospitals were underfunded, and so they just maxed out the usefulness of whatever they had. That made sense, considering the population of the area consisted of maybe 1,000 people. My husband and I were led to exam beds next to one another. The areas could be separated by partition, if need be. 2 nurses came in and greeted us. Again, they were very friendly. They also seemed genuinely concerned about what had happened to us in the accident. We both chuckled when they waved actual glass thermometers. It was quite nostalgic. Throughout the course of the evening, we met a few other staff members, including an older gentleman, Dr. Chisholm. I didn't have the best feeling about him, but he seemed like he was extremely competent and knew what he was doing. Despite the accident, this was turning out to be a pretty good way to start our Thanksgiving, given the fact that the nurses were pretty jovial and, again, seemed very concerned about our welfare. But as I recall, there was one absolutely creepy aspect of this hospital. Dr. Chisholm had ordered x-rays for both my husband and I. An orderly appeared in the examination room shortly thereafter. He was polite, but not as friendly as everyone else had been. He was a man of very few words and unusually tall. He said he'd take us to the x-ray room, one by one, because hospital policy was that you had to be wheeled there in a bed or in a wheelchair. He apologized that there were no wheelchairs readily available and that he could just wheel us there in the bed. So we both agreed. "Ladies first," he said as he motioned for me to lie down on the bed. As we got out into the hallway, I just marveled at how quiet the place was. It was a stark contrast to the hustle and bustle you might expect from a hospital at any other time. We boarded a large elevator with subdued lighting and rode 2 floors down to a basement level, down another long hall of tiled walls and subdued lighting. The orderly never said anything to me during this trip, but occasionally he would stare down at me and smile. Call it my woman's intuition, but this didn't really make me very comfortable. Eventually, he parked the bed by a wall and I heard him walk away. A few seconds later, I heard him say, "She's here," before I heard his footfalls approaching again. At this point, I was sitting up. The orderly motioned for me to step down from the bed and offered his hand to make sure I was safe. I took it and was kind of shocked at how cold it was. The x-ray tech gave me a very jovial, "Happy Thanksgiving," as she motioned me into the room. Her disposition was pleasant, contrasted with the orderly's. Again, the equipment in the x-ray room seemed dated. She handed me a heavy lead vest and positioned me in front of the x-ray plate. Turn this way, turn that way, turn right, turn left. Then she thanked me and I handed her the vest. I felt a bit awkward laying back on the exam bed for the return trip. I really wasn't feeling bad at all, except for a few aches and pains that could be expected from the accident. It just seemed kind of weird not to be able to just walk. But I complied with the policy as the orderly, as silent as before, wheeled me back upstairs. As we got off of the elevator, I glimpsed someone walking down the hall that led back to the exam room. I turned my head in the direction of the movement and I was horrified. There was a figure that was totally black, no details, just black. I actually shot up into a sitting position because I could have sworn the crouched figure had a long tail. But as soon as I could blink, there was nothing there. No one. The orderly stopped the bed. "Are you okay?" he said. I told him that I was and that I guess my eyes are just playing tricks on me. He said in a monotone, "You're exhausted. Your eyes are playing tricks on you." I was exhausted, but this unnerved me. I'd never hallucinated anything like that before when I was tired. I chalked it up to the general creepy environment and the deafening silence all around me. We made it back to the examination room. My husband was chatting with Dr. Chisholm and the nurses as the orderly approached him. "Okay, let's go," said my husband, positioning his arms behind his head as if he were on vacation. I decided not to mention my hallucination at that time. But then I thought, maybe I had a concussion. Maybe that's responsible for what I saw. One of the nurses asked me if I wanted something to drink. I accepted and she brought me a foam cup with ice and apple juice. It was unusually refreshing. "Try to get some rest," she said. As she left the room, she turned down the lights. I closed my eyes but could not really rest. I kept hearing voices whispering. It was weird because the whispers were dozens of people, far more than were actually there with us. Again, I chalked it up to fatigue and the stress of being in the accident earlier. I heard the wheels of my husband's exam bed and then opened my eyes. The orderly wheeled him back into position, and before I could thank him, he left the room. My husband seemed to be asleep, so I closed my eyes again. The whispers returned. One in particular grew more distinct and clear. It kept repeating softly, "Are you with us?" I kind of struggled to open my eyes, but when I did, one of the nurses was uncomfortably close to my face. She was smiling, asking, "Are you with us?" I said that I was, but I was really ready to get out of there altogether. There was something off. It was a growing feeling of impending doom. I was pretty sure I was just having a panic attack. I looked over at my husband, and he was still asleep. I called out for him a few times to wake him up. When he did, he said, "Whoa, I must have gotten knocked around a little harder than I thought." He didn't elaborate. At this point, Dr. Chisholm returned to the room, holding a metal clipboard. "Well, it looks like you did suffer a few contusions, but according to the x-rays, nothing major. All the same, I think we should keep you both." His pause was noticeable. Then he continued, "Overnight." The nurses returned to the room as my husband started to answer. "Well, Doc, if you think that's best," I cut him off. "We'd really like to get to our family. They'll be concerned." One of the nurses said, "Why not just call them and leave a message?" To which I replied, "No, it's Thanksgiving and we need to be with our family." At that point, I noticed the orderly and the x-ray tech enter the room. They were silent. In fact, no one said anything for what had to be an uncomfortable 30 seconds at least. It seemed like an hour. Then Dr. Chisholm broke the tension. "Well, if you must go, do you agree with your wife, sir?" My husband said that he did. We collected our things. I don't really remember leaving, but I came out of my haze as we were driving on the road that led to my in-laws' home. It was 5 a.m. It seemed like we'd spent much more time at the hospital. My in-laws welcomed us, but complained they tried to call and the phones just rang. They didn't even go to voicemail. We decided we needed to get a few hours of sleep and unload the car later. We proceeded to tell my husband's parents what happened with regard to the accident, and we decided we needed to catch a few hours of sleep and that we'd unload the car later. We proceeded to tell my husband's parents what happened with regard to the accident, and that we decided to stop at the hospital just to get checked out. "Which hospital did you go to?" asked my mother-in-law. I told her Henryton. "Okay, sure," she laughed. "Seriously, which hospital did you go to? Was it crowded?" My husband chimed in. "Henryton, up the road." Now my father-in-law piped up, somewhat annoyed. "Son, you didn't go to Henryton, and it's too early for jokes. Just answer her questions so we can all get some rest before folks start arriving." At this point, my husband, who was already looking at me, said, "Listen, Pops, we went to the Henryton Hospital. I don't know what's so strange about that. They checked us out and released us. Although they did suggest they keep us overnight for observation, we didn't think that was necessary." So Dr. Chisholm said. Suddenly, my mother-in-law gasped audibly and put her hand over her mouth before sitting in the nearest chair. Her eyes were as wide as saucers. My father-in-law said, Wait a minute, Dr. Chisholm?" My husband replied, "Yeah, Dr. Chisholm seemed a little long in the tooth to be still manning an emergency room, especially on a holiday, but he seemed competent." My father-in-law said, "Son, I need you to be 100% honest with me right now. You can see how this is upsetting your mother. Are you shitting us or what?" "No, Dad. I don't know what the big deal is, I swear. We got into the accident, went to the hospital to get checked, and now we're here." My father-in-law sat down and looked up at me and my husband. "Son, the Henryton Hospital closed in '85. Dr. Chisholm had been accused of experimentation on state wards. He denied it, but when the investigation started, they found bodies in the basement of the place. That place just started to be plagued with all kinds of problems. Even before it closed, an oxygen leak in the emergency room caused that section of the hospital to burn down. 3 nurses, an orderly, and a receptionist were killed." "Renee," said my mother-in-law. Yes, Renee, Bob Ford's daughter. Sweet girl, so young." My mother-in-law just stared out beyond us and said, "Chisholm lost control of his car right out there on Henryton Road a year later. The car hit a tree and he was ejected. He died instantly, they said. You remember Josh from the volunteer fire company? He's the one that pronounced him dead right there on the scene. There've always been rumors around here of folks seeing Doc Chisholm walking near where the hospital entrance was," my mother-in-law said as she hung her head. No one really knew what to say at this point, but my in-laws, both spiritual people, totally believed us once we described Chisholm and the staff. A simple Google search showed that the hospital had indeed closed in '85. Information about Chisholm was harder to find, probably due to the state burying records for fear of liability. That was helped by the incidents occurring before the advent of the internet. I'm really having a hard time with this, Pops. I swear we were there, my husband said. Dad, we were there, I stressed. Look, guys, I know you're tired, but come on, he said, grabbing his coat and keys. My mother-in-law said nothing but shook her head. She knew what her husband wanted to do. We got into my father-in-law's SUV and he drove back in the direction of where we'd come from. It was that weird period of the morning where sunlight was visible, although the actual sun wasn't yet above the horizon. I always thought of this time as when all the vampires had better head for cover. Last warning. We turned into Henryton Road and headed up the hill. My father-in-law turned the wheel left at the entrance to the hospital. A large steel gate blocked the path. We got out and could see the foundation of where the entrance sign had once sat. The gate had a chain and a large padlock on it. We went around the gate and walked down the path. There was nothing there any longer. Not even a remnant of the old parking lot. Nature had reclaimed it totally. Though you could discern the footprint of several of the buildings. In fact, the area where the emergency room was, the ground was black and slightly oily. My husband placed his hands on his hips, looked at his father, and just shook his head. I said a silent prayer of thanks to God for the protection I knew He provided us.